is the JBL 5.0 Multibeam Soundbar. JBL have sent me the soundbar simply so I can tell you what I think of it. They've made no requirements on this video. I have to tell you, the first thing that struck me when I took this out of the box was, even though I knew it was going to be a small soundbar, how compact this soundbar is. 70 centimeters wide, 10 centimeters across, 6 centimeters high, under 2.8 kilos. So the headlines say, multi-beam. You may be thinking, oh, we've got beams in it, they're sprouting out and they're pointing at the ceiling and they're coming back. So what exactly is multi-beam? Which is the first thing I need to explain. Multi-beam is what they're calling their way of assessing the acoustics of the room in which you place this soundbar. There's a microphone right in the middle of where some of the built-in controls are. Right there is a microphone. They send test tones out of each driver. So let me show you the drivers. This is a 5.0 soundbar. That means 5 discrete separate channels. 0.0 means no separate subwoofer. And by the way, there's no way to expand this. If you later decide on a subwoofer, unlike some of the higher offerings from JBL, what you get day one is what you're going to live with. I'm mentioning the multi-beam, what they call multi-beam technology, is test tones coming out of the 5 discrete channels. We have a center driver. We have 2 drivers very close by. I'll get to that later, whether that's the ideal setup for your front 3 drivers. That's a matter of debate. But that is your right channel, left channel, center channel. And then we have angled out drivers. Angled at 45 degrees will be what would normally be your rear left, your rear right. That is your 5.0. You also get 4 passive radiators. Passive radiators, think ports. You can have ports or you can have passive radiators. They're doing the same job. We've got 4 of them, and we have 2 upward firing passive radiators and 2 downward firing passive radiators. Now, there is clearance on those bottom passive radiators. We only need a little bit of clearance. You normally reckon, divide the circumference of your drivers by 4. That's the sort of clearance you need. We've got little feet on the ends of the soundbar to give clearance. And of course, the passive radiator itself is a little bit above that grill. So we do have the clearance. Firing down does mean you have the benefit of, if you have a big flat surface that you've placed it on, you will get extra bass out of that. You get extra bass. The downside is it's going to be a little bit more woolly. So the multi-beam technology, each individual driver will fire out a test tone. The microphone listens to that test tone coming back, knows what it would expect in its default room, and knows the difference now in the acoustics. So it can balance out the left and right, and it can make the adjustments it thinks it needs for your room. Now bear in mind, it's doing this at the position of the soundbar. The microphone is at the position of the soundbar. The other big deal is, this is Dolby Atmos ready. So it has virtual Dolby Atmos. Atmos, if you don't know, is the height information that goes along a Dolby signal. That track will need to be Dolby Digital Plus, or it needs to be Dolby True HD. Those are the 2 codecs on which you can then have the metadata, that is the Atmos itself, up to 128 different channels of height information. So Atmos is about height information, but of course we don't have ceiling drivers here. In fact, we don't have any real upward, we only have the passive radiators firing up. But what we have got is virtual Dolby Atmos. That's a real thing, and that's Dolby's height virtualizer. So they're doing clever things with psychoacoustics, and they're going to trick your ears, which isn't that hard, surprisingly, to because of the way our ears work, to think there's height things going on, you know, helicopters flying above you, when actually it's just coming from the soundbar. But if you mess about with the actual frequency that your ears are getting, you can quite easily trick your ears into thinking you're getting something you're not. And here's the big deal. When they say multi-beam technology, the use of the test tones and getting hold of what the room is actually doing that it's placed in works alongside virtual Dolby Atmos, which is a thing on its own, but in this particular soundbar, within the range of multi-beam soundbars that JBL do, it's another layer of information that Dolby Virtual Atmos is working with to optimize the way the psychoacoustics it's doing to your ear. So it won't play Dolby Atmos, but what it will do, it will decode all the main Dolby codecs. So it will decode Dolby True HD, which will probably carry the Atmos information. It will decode Dolby Digital Plus. That's a big deal because that's the codec that all the big online companies that do streaming, Netflix, Prime Video, all the big online streamers will use Dolby Digital Plus. So it is the codec of choice. It does mean you're covered with your online streaming services. And of course, it's obviously got on board Dolby Surround, the up mixer. So if it's plain old stereo, the soundbar using Dolby Surround can upmix that to the 5 discrete channels that you've got on board. And it's also DTS capable. But remember, 5.0 channels. So if you're decoding DTS, it can decode DTS up to 5.0, but not 5.1. But the big thing these days is Dolby Atmos. It will decode Dolby Atmos. So you're pretty much covered in terms of what you're going to be using this soundbar for. And it goes a bit further than that. So you also have on board, built in, you have Chromecast, AirPlay 2, and Alexa multi-room. It is Wi-Fi enabled. That means using the appropriate app, you can use this as part of a multi-room, a multi-speaker setup, all in a very compact form. So that's the basic overview of what you're getting when you buy this soundbar. Have a look at the actual hardware. In the box, you will get an HDMI lead. You won't get an optical. It does have an optical in, which is here. It will not support Dolby Digital Plus, Dolby True HD. So no Atmos if you're using optical. So you don't really want to use the optical as your main lead. And the other reason you're not really going to use that as your main audio source is because we have HDMI eARC on this soundbar. And that is the HDMI out. eARC is the successor to HDMI ARC. It can handle a much higher bandwidth, which means it can give you all the latest high-end codecs, all the lossless codecs. You can do your Dolby True HD via eARC. And it gives you nice things like automatic lip sync. So it's a step above the normal ARC. eARC is really nice to have on board. And if you don't know ARC, eARC, they both give you two-way signals. It's audio return channel, which means you can take your HDMI out, your eARC, connect it to your TV, and then you can connect a load of different peripherals to your TV, and they can all talk to the soundbar via the TV. So you're just using your TV controls. By the way, it's got IR remote learning, so you can just use your TV remote, although get to that in a minute. There are things you're going to need the remote for. But eARC and ARC, of course, means you can then control all these other peripherals with that one remote control. But you do have another HDMI in. That's also going to be useful because it supports 4K pass-through. So if you're playing a 4K signal, it'll extract the audio and send the video signal to the telly, all in lovely 4K. We've got USB-A, which if you're not in the USA, that's simply to update it, but you're probably not going to do it that way because we've got an Ethernet port anyway to connect it to the internet. We've also got Wi-Fi to connect it to the internet, and that's how you're going to get your updates. I say outside the USA because in the USA, for some reason only the USA, you can actually play straight off the audio, straight off a USB dongle. In the box is 2 L-shaped mounts to be able to mount that to a wall using the holes here. You can then connect that easily for a wall mount. You will, of course, get your remote control. Now, it is a very basic remote control. And JBL do say the whole point of the soundbar is aimed at keeping things simple. And they certainly have with the remote, because all you've got is the power on, power off, the different modes that you can switch to. Obviously your TV, your Bluetooth, you can play this via Bluetooth, the HDMI connection, and your Atmos button. So if you want to turn Atmos on and off, You can do that with that button, your volume up, volume down, and your mute button. Now the problem is, a lot of functions require the remote, but with multiple pushes. For instance, you've got 5 levels of bass. By default, you will be on level 3. If that's too much or too little and you want to change it, you then have to hold the TV button down for 5 or more seconds, then press volume down. Then you'll get the option to change the level of bass. And there's several functions like that that require pressing a couple of buttons, remembering which ones they are. And I'm still, even though I've used this quite a bit now, I'm still having to refer to the manual to remember which way around all these things are. Now they've got smart features. So JBL, what they call their smart EQ, their smart modes. Smart mode includes the multibeam functions and the Atmos functions, but they also do other dynamic things. If you want to turn that off, again, it's the mute button, I believe. Hold that for 5 seconds or more, then the plus button, I think, off the top of my head. Then you get to turn smart features on and off. And then, even if you've turned it off, when you turn the soundbar on again, it will be off. Why would you want to turn smart features off if it's smart? Personally, I've found, especially on just normal speech channels, such as news channels, the audio is a little bit muddied because it's trying to do effects over the top of what is just speech information. There's nothing else going on. Turning the smart features off, I find, it makes it a little bit clearer. It ties it better to the center channel, and it's clearer. But you've got to do that each and every time. If there was one button to turn that on and off, just like Atmos, that would have been great. You're going to need, for some of the functions, the basic remote, and then there's other functions where you'll do it on the soundbar itself. It's a kind of little bit disjointed, and it's kind of like they want this to be a plug and play. You get the soundbar, it's in a default mode day one, and then you just leave it. But you can't just leave it because you've got to set up things like your Chromecast, your AirPlay, the Wi-Fi, and indeed multi-beam technology itself. So it's kind of falling between two stools in a way. What you really want to know is, what's it like in real world use? So I'm going to compare a 5.1 track versus a 7.1 track with Dolby Atmos. So let's see how much difference we can hear when there's Atmos metadata on that soundtrack itself. How much does that improve the height virtualizer, which doesn't actually need the metadata, when we're comparing it to a normal 5.1 track?
I'm so good at this.
Time's up, bank teller!
I'm so good at this.
Time's up, bank teller!
So on the same movie, switching between 5.1 and Atmos 7.1, overall it does go louder, and that's going to slant what you're hearing 3 dB louder on this particular movie. It's going to sound more dynamic anyway. Most of that increase in the bass is upper bass, but we've also got more highs. To really hear the differences, we need to normalize them. The difference is subtle, and the difference there, I played the same track. I've just switched between 5.1 and 7.1 soundtracks. The 7.1 is playing louder, so it's made it a little bit, it does automatically sound more dynamic because of that. We're getting a hang of, it's a nice sounding soundbar. Amazingly compact. It does a good job of, in its small form, of giving you some semblance of a big sound that's bigger than the actual soundbar itself. I'm going to normalize them. What does that mean, normalize? Well, so they are the same loudness to your ears, and let's have a listen to the difference then.
I'm so good at this.
Time's up, bank teller! Nope.
So now overall loudness is the same, and now we can see the real difference in the balance is that with Atmos on, we've got more clarity, we've got more definition. The balance swings slightly from bass to the highs when you switch from 5.1 non-Atmos to 7.1 Atmos soundtrack. You'd have to listen closely to get the differences, but there are definite differences. One of the major differences, when you have those extra channels, you've got extra information, and you've got real Atmos metadata to play with. So it's not having to guess like some of these virtualizers do. It's having to guess what is actual height information, what's the helicopter in a complex soundtrack. The actual information of what is height information is already there. And it's quite subtle, but it's definite. It is clearer and it's more defined, the sound effects. And the overall balance of the sound is shifted towards the highs. So Atmos virtualization is a real thing. It makes a difference, but it's subtle, and you'd have to listen for those differences. Some of the other things that you can adjust on here include the bass levels. There is it's not amazingly deep bass, but there's plenty of mid bass. Mid bass, is around 60 to 100 hertz. There's plenty of mid bass. There's enough to annoy neighbors if they're in close proximity. But you may actually want to have more bass. You may want less bass. You have 5 levels. Remember, by default, it's going to be on level 3. Going to play the difference between level 1, level 3, and level 5.
I'm under way too much pressure.
Come on! Go, 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 go!
I'm under way too much pressure.
Come on! Go, 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 go!
I'm under way too much pressure.
Come on! Go, 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 go!
In default mode, which is level 3 in terms of bass, if you come down to level 1, the difference in bass is big, almost 4 decibels less bass on level 1, and the overall balance now shifts towards mids and upper bass. So if you are not a fan of the old bass, or it's late at night, it is possible to significantly cut the bass that you get at default mode. But if you actually want more bass, maximum is level 5. The overall loudness is now the same. You do get a little bit more in the bass at level 5, just under a decibel. But the sense that you've got a bit more bass than you're actually getting is coming from the fact that you've got a mids cut. So you're actually getting less in terms of the mids by a half a decibel on level 5 compared to level 3. So some relative balance changes, not just an increase in bass, and not as significant as cutting the bass when you went from level 3 down to level 1. So the difference between level 1 and level 3 is significant. It's significant enough that it's late at night, you don't want much bass, you don't want to annoy the neighbors, or you just want to hear a bit more of the vocals. Level 1 will tame the bass to not quite bass light, but not far off that. It's low level bass, but the bass is there. But it's not really going to annoy anybody, and it's going to, for a lot of people, actually sound maybe a little bit more balanced. Because I do find, and I think maybe because of how the left and right channel is so close to the center channel, and the fact that it's the way the smart modes work on this, that in complex tracks, the vocals, the speech can get a little bit muddied. So the big thing is it's got Dolby Virtual Atmos. So is there much of a difference between turning it on and turning it off? You're going to hope there's quite a bit of a difference. Let's have a listen.
Keep behind you, brother! I Keep behind you, brother!
In terms of the actual frequency response, with the same source soundtrack, switching Atmos off means you're half a decibel down in the bass on that particular soundtrack, but this seems to be what's happening. The Atmos decoding, resulting in a stronger bass, and along with the virtualization in terms of height, you get a sense of a slightly bigger soundstage. The difference is definite, but it can be quite subtle. It's going to depend on the track. It's going to make more difference on a well-recorded soundtrack. Obviously, on a proper Atmos soundtrack, 7.1 Atmos Dolby True HD is going to have a little bit more going for it than if it was a 5.1 without the actual Atmos information. Turning Atmos on and off, you get a tad more in the bass, but you also do get a sense of a bigger soundstage. I'm not going to say suddenly, you know, you're getting helicopters right above your head and it's all coming. But it just expands the sound a little bit more. It's a little bit more immersive. But you'd have to go through A and B to really hear the differences. But don't forget, it's going to make more difference if you've calibrated it to work in your room using the multi-beam, so-called multi-beam technology. So we're talking about calibrated, not calibrated. Let's have a difference. Now, I'm playing this in a very well-treated room. Calibrated, uncalibrated. The difference is the balance has now shifted towards the highs. You can see the roll off on the highs, not calibrated, much stronger now, highs, calibrated. Also a bit more on the bass, 15 LUFS, 16 LUFS, about a decibel up, but the balance overall slanted towards the highs. That's what I would expect. Calibrate in a very well treated room with lots of absorption. So that was good. It shifted its balance towards the highs, exactly what I would hope it would do. It might do that in every room, I don't know. But in my testing, it did what I hoped it would do. Calibrating it gave me sharper, more defined highs. Also gave me a little bit more bass. But the actual change in the slope, we talk about the actual signatures in terms of slopes, it's now, the slope is now more towards the highs. Even though we've got more bass, we've got even more in the way of highs. That's sharpened up the sound. For me, the calibration did work. So we've got Bluetooth, and a lot of you watching my channel will probably already be saying, and what can it do for my music? I'm streaming my Bluetooth music. Remember, this is not a portable soundbar. This requires mains power. But anyway, for occasional music listening, let's compare it to my world champion pound for pound in terms of value. The Motion Boom, which does have a decent dollop of bass. This is a soundbar. Soundbar should all... A big deal about a soundbar should be how it produces bass, because that's where all the effects are, in the bass. In fact, we get dedicated channels for the bass, don't we? Not only subwoofer, we have low frequency effects going on, because it's all about those explosions for most of us in a soundtrack. And this is only this is a 5.0 without a subwoofer, and you may be thinking, yeah, well, I'm not going to get the bass that I want out of that, am I? Let's compare it to a speaker, albeit a smaller Bluetooth speaker, well known for having deep, up down to about 40 hertz. Let's hear the difference.
Uninvited, you wanna hold me close, but I know what you up to. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Why are you hiding? Tell me, what must I do? Come to you, come to you. You're mine, mine, mine. It's right, right, right. It's right, 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 right now. Why are you hiding? Tell me, what must I do? Come to you, come to you. You're mine, mine, mine. It's right, right, right. It's right, 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 right now. Why are you hiding? Tell me, what must I do? Come to you, come to you.
JBL soundbar, the Motion Boom, normalized to get about the same overall loudness. And the differences are the JBL 5 soundbar, meant to be used with movies, does have more bass, some 3.5 decibels up in terms of overall bass, although the deeper bass is actually much closer between the two. 40 hertz where the Boom excels, there's only a decibel in it. So most of that advantage to the JBL 5 is coming from the upper bass. And that's where the Motion Boom, especially with my settings, is slightly lacking. And that's the real difference between the two of them. But when it comes to the mids and the highs, the Boom takes over, it's got the clarity. And the bass on the JBL 5, on the JBL 5.0, it's a bit woolly and out of control. So you've got bass, you can listen to music, but it's really meant for movies. So it's not going to be the greatest speaker in the world for music. And the clue to that is it's a soundbar. It's meant to go with movies. It's not meant for playing music, but you can indeed play music via the soundbar. It's going to sound okay. In terms of bass though, a speaker, the Motion Boom, that known for its deep bass, now looking a bit silly. We had a near 4 decibels advantage for the bass. So it definitely does produce decent bass. Not massively deep, not down to 20 hertz that you would get with your dedicated subwoofers, but decently down to 40 hertz, rolling off maybe around 50 hertz. But it's a bit muffled against a speaker that itself can be known for being a little bit muffled. But it's listenable, so don't make this your only way of listening to music. But as for occasional listening, part of a multi-room system, can certainly do a job, can certainly give you a dollop of bass. In terms of how loud does this go, on maximum volume, on level 3, remember we can go to level 5. Well, I was using Free Guy as my 7.1 as my test track. C-weighted, I got 106.7 decibels. So let's wrap it up. What's the conclusion? First of all, the conclusion is I was quite impressed with what the soundbar can do. I read a lot of conflicting reviews online. It has bass, it doesn't have... Remember, it comes by default on level 3. You can go up to level 5. It's not massively deep bass, but it's a compact soundbar. So I would say the amount of bass you get from this soundbar is bigger than you would expect from something of this size. The downside for me was when there's no real effects going on in the soundtrack anyway, and I'm talking about normal TV stations, I'm having to turn off the smart mode to get the speech more focused. But as soon as I turn the soundbar off, it automatically comes back on next time. That to me was a little bit annoying. I don't really see the logic in why it would do that. But again, I'm looking for picky things. Overall, I have a really positive experience. Now, when I reviewed this, when you're watching this, remember, for me, this was just after Black Friday deals, 250 quid. That's almost, well, it is a no-brainer. This is easily £250 worth of a soundbar. We've got 5 48mm by 80mm drivers. It's almost the same size as the drivers you get in the JBL Flip 6, the woofers anyway. We've got 5 of them. The JBL Flip 6 is 120 quid. 250 quid, I think the normal retail is 350 quid. But at 250 quid, it's an absolute no-brainer. It's a steal. Rated at 250 watts. Here's the thing. Rated at a max 250 watts. So what we really want to know is the RMS. We want to know the average that it can, how much power can it produce over a long period of time. Max is it's not bad, not as bad as a peak rating, but it's not very much different. In terms of the Wi-Fi, it supports up to AC, so that's great. 2.4 gigahertz, 5 gigahertz. Didn't mention supports Dolby Vision, high dynamic range. But here's the thing, with all that modern technology, Atmos, ER, blah, 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 modern, Bluetooth 4.2. A massive deal, but that did surprise me. Less than a year old, Bluetooth 4.2. But that's really being picky. But that's my job, to be a bit picky. Should mention the LCD on this is really clear. I've used a lot of soundbars. We could hardly read what was going on. This is telling me it's connected to my phone. But my point being, even from a distance, that's really easy to read. Get a lot of information, but some of it may be confusing. Things you're likely to see on the LCD, PCM, probably stereo that you're playing. It's uncompressed stereo. Doesn't mean it's lossless, means it's uncompressed. By the time, when it's hitting the soundbar, there's nothing for the soundbar to do. It's already uncompressed. It's going to say a lot about Dolby Surround. I found this a bit weird. Dolby Surround DD, Dolby Surround DD+, Dolby Surround True HD. Because Dolby Surround is normally what you'd call the up mixer. I find it a little confusing. It just wants to advertise that because it's only a little LCD. It's scrolling across a bit of extra information didn't really need to give us. Just remember, if you see Dolby Surround DD, that's Dolby Digital AC3. If you see Dolby Surround DD+, Dolby Digital Plus Enhanced AC3, it's the more modern version of Dolby Digital. That's compressed, can take up to 7.1. Then you may see Dolby Surround True HD, lossless 7.1. Well, I think up to 17 channels you can get on Dolby True HD, but can carry, along with Dolby Digital Plus and True HD, can carry the Atmos signal. So if you only see DD, it won't be any Atmos. It can't carry the Atmos metadata. You may see multi-channel PCM. So again, PCM we now know is getting it uncompressed. It's nothing for the soundbar to do. It's either already been decoded or it's coming straight to it as a decoded signal. Uncompressed doesn't mean lossless. Multi-channel, so it's PCM in surround format. If you try to play something that it can't do, it's going to say unsupported. There's no dynamic range limiting, which is a function you can often get, where you don't get sudden changes between, I'm very quiet, now I'm really, really, really loud, which can be really, really annoying midnight when there's someone in the next room. It stops the big changes from the very quiet to the very loud. You won't get that on this soundbar. No dynamic range limiting. At £250, I hope it's still working. To me, this is a no-brainer. You're getting a lot for your money, and if you need something in a compact form, this does the job and can sound quite decent. Can give you an experience of virtual surround sound, not going to be true surround sound, and can give you a decent amount of bass. It's going to be, I guess, a lot will come on your expectations. For me, it exceeded my personal expectations. I've used a lot of soundbars. I think it delivered a lot for the size. It was the size it took me. It can certainly get better sounding soundbars. That's not the point. But this is 250 quid. And look at it. I mean, I can almost put that in my jacket pocket. That was amazing. So my overall experiences, was really happy with the soundbar. Of course, I can be picky. I always find something to say. I don't know why they did that, or then why do they did that. I can remember a lot of different people have inputs into these products. At 350 quid, you're going to have to decide, does it sit right with you? But I can only tell you, when I reviewed this at 250 quid, that's a no-brainer. That is a no-brainer. So I hope you got something out of what was a longer review than I was expecting, but because there's a lot to say, I think, about the soundbar. So I just wanted to give you my opinion and give you a proper overview of what to expect. For me, it was a positive experience with this soundbar. As long as you know what your expectations are on a soundbar of this size. I thank you for watching. I hope to see you again.
I ain't about that life. I ain't about that life. Ain't no project wife, got my logic right, cause I'm not your type. I ain't about that life. I ain't about that life. Sorry, ma, I ain't get it right. I'ma just live my life. I ain't about that. I ain't about that life.